Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today, we're covering my pick for the best monk build in Baldur's Gate 3. This is an update video to my previous video of the same name, and is the last of the update videos in my simple class builds series. So once we're done this, all 12 of the classes will have been updated into the modern era of Baldur's Gate 3. I think it's important to update those videos because they were some of the first ones that I did way earlier in Baldur's Gate 3's development, and so I wanted to update them to be compatible with Honor Mode and with the lessons that we've learned over the last nearly a year of character optimization. Like all of my simple build series, this video will focus primarily on a monoclass monk, but because monk is so heavily incentivized to multiclass, I will have a more extensive multiclassing section than normal for these videos to go over some of the more common ways to build multiclass monks as well. Alright, let's get right into it. So what do monks bring to the table? Well, in a word, power. Monks have some of the highest raw power level amongst their class and abilities of any character in Baldur's Gate 3. If a wizard is Batman, whose job is to have a tool belt with an answer to every possible problem that might come up, a monk is Superman, who only has one answer to every possible problem that might come up, but that answer is punching through solid steel, so it's sort of a one-size-fits-all solution. Monks can solve every problem with violence. They move very, very quickly, and they hit really, really hard. So they will always be able to get to the most important target in an encounter, and they'll always be able to kill them. They rarely miss their attacks, and any enemy that is going to survive their incredibly high damage output, they can simply stun, removing them from the fight for a turn, and giving you a whole extra round of attacks to take that enemy out in following turns. So monks are kind of assassins. They're in many ways even more assassiny than the assassin rogue, because they move incredibly fast, they play a sort of hit and run playstyle, and they obliterate any target that they turn their attention to. Monks also have some of the easiest and most powerful access to broken mechanics in Baldur's Gate 3. The way that the class is balanced and some of the balance changes that were made from the tabletop version of Dungeons & Dragons to Baldur's Gate 3's video game version have given monks some of the most powerful and some of the least balanced tools available in the game. So if you want to power up your characters and your party to the maximum possible extent, monks give you the option to do that in incredibly powerful ways. They do pay for this power in some senses, though. Monks are a little squishier than other melee classes. They will tend to have lower armor class and lower hit points than other melee classes, and so you do have to be a little bit cagier and more careful with your positioning on a monk than you do with, say, a fighter or a paladin. They also have not that much gear available in the game. There's good gear for monks, and the great thing about it is that it doesn't conflict with other characters' important items. So your monk will almost never require an item that another character needs more, because their gearing is sort of orthogonal to the normal gearing of Dungeons & Dragons characters. They just need completely different things, but their late game items are less absurdly powerful than some of the late game items available to other classes. That said, the inherent strength of the class means that they mostly don't need them. So those are two of the sort of downsides of monk, but their mobility, power, incredible damage, and ability to just brute force their way through any problem makes them one of the most powerful possible options for an honor mode run. If you like to just punch things until they are dead, monk is definitely the class for you. I'm using Lae'zel as the example character here because while there's no monk by default in the party, playing as a monk fits her particularly well for some story reasons related to her progression as a character. But from a mechanical standpoint, Astarion is almost certainly the most powerful monk. His unique story abilities will increase your accuracy and your damage per attack dramatically, and so he can make the most powerful endgame monk. Karlach is also very good because her soul coin mechanic, which can increase her damage output, can work with Monk's multi-hits when she's at low health to do a significant amount of additional damage. Lae'zel, though, gets, as a Githyanki, light and medium armor proficiency. Monks who you might think normally want to be unarmored because they have a lot of abilities that key off of being unarmored. But in the early game, they haven't yet received those abilities, and so often in the very early game, you're better off wearing light or medium armor than you are remaining unarmored. If you look at monks' starting abilities, martial arts, deft strikes, and dexterous attacks don't care whether you're in armor or not. Only unarmored defense does, and obviously unarmored defense just gives you some armor class, which is replaced by your armor. If you get armor that's better than unarmored defense, it's better to wear that. So monk can benefit pretty strongly from picking a race with armor proficiencies to allow them to use armor in the early game, like Githyanki for medium armor, or especially Wood Half-Elf if you're building this as a custom character, who gets light armor and shields and additional movement speed. Dwergar also make excellent monks for Enlarge and the ability to turn invisible at any time outside of combat, so they can start combat right next to the most important target in any given encounter and take them out right away. For ability score selection for our monk, monks are one of the hardest characters to put together a strong ability point spread for in all of Baldur's Gate 3, because monks are incredibly multi-attribute dependent, or MAD. They need 4 of the 6 attributes, which isn't that unusual for characters, but unlike other characters that usually need 1 stat as high as possible, and then have moderate need for the other 3 stats, monks need 3 of those 4 stats to be as high as they can possibly get them. That puts a lot of pressure on our ability score points and makes it a little bit more difficult for us to build a strong attribute spread. So I'm going to talk about different ways that we can manage that restriction when we're building our monk. The first is to build a dexterity-based monk, which lets us focus on only 3 attribute points, and while that gives up one of the strongest things that monk has access to in Baldur's Gate 3, which requires strength, it does make the character much easier to build. If you're interested in a build guide for that version, check out my guide, The Classic Monk, where I talk about a dex-based monk. The second way is to use items to replace having to actually take attribute points in our level up screen. In Baldur's Gate 3, you'll encounter elixirs of hill giant strength very early in the game, and these are purchasable from merchants, so you can stockpile enough of them that you can drink 1 every day, and when drunk it sets your strength to 21 for the entire day, no matter your starting strength. Using that strategy, you can completely replace strength, set it to 8, and just have 20 strength permanently as long as you constantly drink elixirs. There's also the Gloves of Dexterity, which you encounter a little bit later, which can do sort of a similar thing for dexterity. The final option is to just muscle through it and build our character as best as possible without relying on items. That's what I'm going to be demonstrating for you today, because for these simple build guides I don't want them to be item reliant, but I will mention that the elixir version of Monk is much more powerful because you get so many free attribute points, and I will talk about how to build that version as well as we're going through building the character. Whether you're using items or not in order to get your attribute points, it can also be very helpful to start monks with this attribute spread: 12 strength, 16 dexterity, 16 constitution, and 14 wisdom. And then at level 4, when you have the need for strength that comes from the Tavern Brawler feat, respec your character into the final attribute selection for this character. That final attribute selection is going to be 17 points in strength. We need the odd number because Tavern Brawler is going to give us an extra point. 14 in dexterity, 14 in constitution, and 12 in wisdom, with the remaining 2 points stuck into intelligence because it's the most useful of these abilities. Some enemies have abilities that target an intelligence saving throw, so we just put our odd points there. This gives us a fairly squishy character, but gives us the 17 strength that we need to maximize Tavern Brawler, which is super important for our damage. Finally, for skill selection, just make certain that you have athletics, because monks are not going to be doing that many skill checks in general. They are not likely to be your conversation character, and they won't be doing too much lockpicking typically. Most parties will have someone else do that. So the only skill check that you need your monk to make is to occasionally kick an enemy off a cliff, so make certain that you've selected athletics. Other than that, nothing else to do at level 1, but let's just quickly go over Monk's starting abilities as well. The most important of these is Flurry of Blows, which costs you a key point, but lets you make 2 unarmed strikes as a bonus action. All of our attacks are going to be unarmed strikes, so this effectively gives us 3 attacks per turn right from the beginning of the game. Fighters need to be level 11 before they get 3 attacks per turn, so we get to do that right from the start. And even on turns where we don't have key points to spend on Flurry of Blows, we still have the martial arts bonus unarmed strike, where when we make a main hand attack, we still get to make 1 additional attack. So we can either make 3 attacks by spending a resource, or just make 2 attacks every turn of combat. So we're attacking much more frequently than other characters. That will be a theme that you're going to see repeated as we continue to level up monks. You also get unarmored defense, so our base AC with this attribute spread is going to be 13, which is why I recommend taking a race that can wear armor. That'll let you improve that just a little bit more in the early game. Your attacks will scale with your dexterity instead of your strength if your dex is higher, but our strength is going to be higher, so that won't matter unless you started with the dex-based attribute spread and intend to respec at level 4. Alright, that's it for level 1. Let's move on to level 2. At character level 2 for Monk, there's no decisions to make, but you do get a ton of awesome abilities. Firstly, you get an extra key point, you get 1 more every level, and these refresh on a short rest, so you're very quickly going to reach a point where you don't have to worry about spending key points, you'll just have enough to fuel your abilities. As long as you're not using like 3 per turn, you will have plenty, and your Monk will not run out of resources before the rest of your party has run out. You also get unarmored movement, where you get to move 10 feet faster when you're not wearing armor. At this stage, it might still be better to be in armor, but fairly soon, your damage output will be high enough that it's more important to be able to get to the appropriate target. Monks are going to play often as a striker, a sort of hit-and-run style character, where you run up to the most important target on a field, delete them, and then run away before their allies can retaliate. So the ability to move very quickly is very important. To aid with that, you also get Step of the Wind Dash, which gives you dash as a bonus action, similar to the Rogue level 2 class feature, though this one requires a key point, but you also get to jump without spending any actions, so that can increase your movement distance and mobility even more. Since we're a strength-based build, our jump distance will be pretty incredible, so Step of the Wind Dash gives us tremendous mobility when we need it. You can also use Step of the Wind Disengage to get away from enemies without provoking an opportunity attack. This will come up sometimes, but most of the time you'd rather just kill whatever enemy you're in contact with, so you won't end up using this that frequently. And Patient Defense, which gives disadvantage to attack rolls against you. This can be useful if you get stuck in a really bad situation, but the goal on Monk, as always, is to have enemies not able to attack you because they're either dead, stunned, or out of range of you. So Patient Defense is sort of a last-ditch effort. A last resort is the word that I was looking for there, rather than a primary defensive strategy. Your primary defensive strategy is running away. No decisions to make at level 2, though, so let's move on to level 3. Character level 3. We get to take our subclass. This is the most important decision that we're going to make, but one of the monk subclasses is significantly unbalanced compared to the others and is just way more powerful. While all of 3 of the monk subclasses are viable, the best by far is Way of the Open Hand. Way of the Open Hand gives you way more damage than the other 2 subclasses, so while the utility from 4 Elements or Way of the Shadow can be very fun characters, Open Hand Monk just eclipses them in terms of the sheer amount of damage output that it has, and so is almost always going to be the strongest selection. You also, when you take Way of the Open Hand, get these special Flurry of Blows, which have the same cost as your existing Flurry of Blows and do the same amount of damage, but are just better because they add an additional rider effect. Flurry of Blows Topple can knock an enemy prone, which is incredibly powerful because that gives you advantage on all your subsequent attacks against them. Since we're going to be making tons of attacks per turn, having advantage on our later attacks means we're even more likely to hit, and so are going to be taking out enemies even more reliably. Stagger can cause an enemy to be unable to take reactions, which is just a better version of the disengage, of Step of the Wind Disengage. enemies who can't react can't make opportunity attacks, so you can get away from them safely. Can also prevent some of the very dangerous reactions on honor mode that some bosses have as legendary actions. And Flurry of Blows Push knocks the enemy backwards, which can send them into hazardous environments that your party has set up, or careening off of cliffs, which is an incredibly powerful ability. Repositioning enemies is always good. Doing so as a bonus action while doing amazing amount of damage means that your character is always going to be able to do cool stuff and powerful stuff with these abilities. One other important thing with Flurry of Blows Topple is that enemies who fall prone lose concentration on whatever they're concentrating on. So an enemy spellcaster can be made to drop concentration on an important spell if you hit them with Topple, and they don't get a saving throw to maintain concentration. If they fall over, they just lose it immediately. So very helpful if an opponent has a powerful spell that you want to get rid of. At character level 4, we get to take our very first feat, and this is the first of the incredibly broken mechanics that monks get to take advantage of. The feat that we're going to take is going to be Tavern Brawler, and this is why we took Strength, why we warped our character build in order to be able to take Strength, because Tavern Brawler is such an incredibly powerful feat in Baldur's Gate 3. This is a feat that was changed significantly from the tabletop version, and in Baldur's Gate, where it doesn't do anything like this, but in Baldur's Gate, whenever you use an unarmed attack, you get to add your Strength modifier twice to both the attack roll, the to hit roll, and the damage. Dungeons & Dragons runs on a concept called bounded accuracy, which is essentially the idea that your hit chance will never exceed certain percentages. It won't fall too far outside of the bounds in order to make combat unbalanced. Tavern Brawler completely breaks this core design concept for Dungeons & Dragons, and monks are the character that gets to take fullest advantage of this. When you have a Tavern Brawler monk with high strength, you will almost never miss your attacks, and all of your attacks are doing way more damage than they should, because you're adding twice your strength modifier to damage. So the fact that you're able to do this many times per round, because you're a monk, so you're making constant attacks. At this point in the game, we're making 3 attacks per turn, and each of those 3 attacks is going to be adding our strength modifier twice over, and hitting basically 100% of the time, because we're adding our strength modifier twice over to our hit chance as well. So Tavern Brawler as a feat completely breaks the game balance, allowing your character to exceed the normal values for stats for a character and overwhelm enemies with tremendous amounts of accuracy and damage. When you take Tavern Brawler, you also get a single point in an attribute, so that's why we took the odd point in strength and can go up to 18 strength, meaning that we're doing +8 to hit and +8 to damage from our strength alone at this point in the game. If you are using the strength elixirs, you will have +10 to both of those, because you'll have 21 strength for a +5 bonus. And you'll have selected 15 starting constitution. Your starting stats would be 16, 15, 16 in wisdom, and so you just put the odd point into constitution so that you have 16 in all 3 of dex, con, and wisdom, plus your 20 strength from your elixirs. Tavern Brawler is incredibly broken, and monks get to use it, so this is one of the ways where we get one of the most broken mechanics in the game to work as powerfully as it can for us. But it just gets better from here, as you'll see when we get to level 5. At level 5, we get extra attack, like most martial classes, so now we are making 2 attacks with our main action and 2 attacks with our bonus action, for a total of 4 attacks per round. Again, other martial classes are only making 2 at this point, so we're making twice as many as those classes, and our attacks hit harder and are more accurate. But we also get Stunning Strike. Stunning Strike lets us make as an action, and this says it uses an action, but it just uses an attack, so it'll use just one of your 2 attacks per turn, to attempt to stun the target that we hit. Stun for a turn stops the enemy from doing anything. Stun just completely disables them from moving, taking actions, bonus actions, reactions, They can't do anything while they're stunned. And against a boss, obviously, stunning them for an entire turn just wins the encounter on its own. Stunning an important enemy for a turn just completely takes them out. Another change that was made from tabletop D&D to Baldur's Gate 3 is that in tabletop, the save DC for Stunning Strike is based on your wisdom. So we would have a relatively low chance of actually landing the stun in tabletop D&D. But in Baldur's Gate, it's based on either your strength or your dexterity, whichever is higher. So not only do we get to hit really hard and do tons of damage by taking a high strength, we also get to land our stuns extremely reliably because they rely on our strength in order to hit. So we can stun just about any enemy. There's actually not that many enemies in the game that are immune to stun as well. So even the most dangerous encounters in the game, you probably just never learn what their mechanics are because they're either dead from your incredible damage or stunned before they get to act. You just don't have to deal with what they're doing. That's why we can get away with being relatively squishy with only 14 constitution, because we're so fast and we do so much damage and we can stun enemies. We will just never have to face what enemies are actually bringing to the table, because the most dangerous ones our monk is going to get off the table before they actually do anything. At level 6, Way of the Open Hand monk gets the subclass feature, Manifestation of Body, Mind, or Soul, which allows you to deal additional damage on every single attack that you make. And remember, you're making 4 attacks per round, minimum at this point. And that damage is equal to your Wisdom modifier, which currently is only 1, so we will like to increase our Wisdom if possible to make this more powerful, plus a d4. That d4 also gets doubled if you critically hit, and since you're attacking so often, you'll critically hit pretty frequently, so you'll see double damage from this ability pretty often. We also get access to Wholeness of Body, which heals you, but for an extra 3 turns, gives you an additional bonus action. You might recall bonus actions from the Flurry of Blows attack, which is 2 attacks for a bonus action. So when you activate Wholeness of Body, for the next 3 turns, you can make up to 6 attacks per round before any additional effects from a haste potion or a bloodlust elixir or anything like that, or something haste cast from an ally, which will let you make even more attacks. By default, you can make 6 attacks per round. All of them do way more damage than any other character's attacks. All of them hit more reliably than any other character's attacks. So your damage output is just tremendous at this level. Having gotten level 6, this is where, if we were multiclassing, and I'll talk about this more in the multiclassing section, we would deviate to the next class that we're taking, because this is our most powerful ability. But for monoclass monk, we are, of course, just going to continue, and we're going to go to level 7. Where at level 7, we don't make any particular decisions, but we do get evasion. So if we make a successful dexterity save against a damaging spell effect, and damaging spells are one of the few things that we're sort of in danger from, because they often are pretty long range, so they can reach us even with our high retreat range. We take half damage from them even if we fail, and no damage if we succeed, so we're suddenly much better at surviving against enemy spellcasters, assuming they live long enough to get their spell off. We also get Stillness of Mind, which, if you're charmed or frightened, you use your turn to get out of this ability. This is actually secretly sort of a downside in Baldur's Gate 3, because it eats your turn to cast Stillness of Mind, and you don't get to choose whether to use it or not. So ideally you want to either not get targeted by these effects, or have immunity to this kind of wisdom targeting effect. Fear immunity is something you can definitely acquire as you go through the game, so monks should be on the lookout for that. From items or abilities or allied abilities to avoid proccing Stillness of Mind. It can still be helpful if you're charmed or frightened for multiple turns. It will get you out of that, but often it will be a little bit dangerous because it'll stop you from moving. You're just going to use your turn to get out of that effect. At monk level 8, we get our second feat, and for those of you who have played Honor Mode before, it will be no surprise what our second feat is. We're going to take Alert. Alert gives you +5 to your initiative, which currently initiative is one of the weak points of this build. Since we had to sacrifice dexterity in order to get our strength as high as we needed it, our initiative has only been +2, so we've been reliant on gear in order to have high initiative up to this point, but Alert gives us +5, meaning that we're going to win initiative against just about every enemy in the game with our +7 initiative, and remove surprise. As long as your monk gets to act, any dangerous enemy in the fight will be dead or stunned by the time it rolls around to their turn. So the most important thing that we can do is ensure that we go first. Alert lets us do that. At monk level 9, we get additional unarmored movement. We went up to +15 feet at level 6, and at level 9, difficult terrain no longer slows you down, and you can jump an extra 20 feet. Remember that we have Step of the Wind dash, which allows us to use dash to double our movement speed and jump without spending a second bonus action. So we can now move double our movement speed and jump an additional with an incredibly long jump distance, since we have high strength, and jump an additional 20 feet. So we can traverse any arena in the game in a single turn if necessary. We also get these resonant punches, which allow you to set up explosions by punching an enemy and then triggering the resonation blast. These can chain in between enemies as well if you resonate a couple of them, and the overlapping damage can clear small enemies very, very quickly. It also just adds to your damage. 3d6 force damage is a lot of additional damage on top of your normal punching damage. So you just get tons of extra AoE damage from having access to these resonating punches, which monks are already incredible at single target damage. Having AoE damage removes one of the only weaknesses remaining for the class in terms of being able to take out certain kinds of enemies. At monk level 10, our unarmored movement gets even faster, so our mobility, already ridiculous, becomes even more ridiculous, and you become immune to poison, and you can't be affected by the poisoned condition or affected by disease. Immune to poison damage is actually pretty helpful. There's some fights in the game where cloud kills happen. There's a lot of late game fights where you're in arenas that have clouds of poison in them, or you need to walk through poison. And also you can use this to set up your monk inside a cloud kill cast by an ally, where they will be immune to the poison damage, and that can be a pretty devastating combo. Your monk can keep enemies stunned and locked in the cloud kill, taking constant damage. So in a fight where you need extra damage, which admittedly are rare because you're playing a monk, you have access to that if you have an ally with poison damage that you can use your monk to lock enemies inside. This is a surprisingly useful ability that you won't notice that often, because it's a passive and it just prevents bad things from happening, but it will actually come up pretty frequently throughout the late game. Then at monk level 11, you get Sanctuary after your long rest, which is kind of fun. It can let you start fights by just walking into the middle of enemies, and they won't be able to attack you until you start a fight. So even if we lose initiative, things can't go too terribly wrong in the first fight of the day. It's not a powerful ability, not a very powerful ability, but it's flavorful and leads to some very funny moments. And finally, at monk level 12, we get to take our very last feat. And of course, at each of these levels, we've gained additional key points as well, which is very important. It fuels your abilities. When you hit monk level 12, you will have way more key points than you know what to do with. So you can flurry multiple times per turn. You can dash every turn, and you still won't be able to burn through all of your key points before your short rest, or before your allies have used their resources. For our feat selection, we're just going to take an ability improvement to max out our strength, because of course we double the value of our strength, so more strength is always better for this character. If you are using strength elixirs for this character, you do get a third feat, and there's a lot of very cool options that you can take at this point. Some options include mobile, to be even faster if you want to be able to just go at absolute light speed. Lucky, because one of the few things that can go wrong for this character is getting hit by a debilitating saving throw effect, like a paralysis or something. Lucky can give you rerolls to evade those. Mage Slayer, which can help you shut down enemy casters even more. All are great options. And one that is surprisingly solid for this character as well is Tough, because just 2 extra hit points per level can stop you from just getting one shot. Monks are a little bit squishier than other melee classes, so if you find that your monk is taking a lot of damage, you can pick up Tough to try to survive. So there's a lot of different options. The one that I would recommend if you are, obviously, the one I'm recommending for this build is to take +2 strength. The one I would recommend if you are doing the elixir build at this point is to take Lucky. Just gives you a couple extra options in case things go horribly wrong, but honestly you have a lot of room to play there because Monk is such a powerful class, especially if you're using the elixir build. Alright my friends, that is our 12 levels of Monk, but of course we can power up this character even more with proper itemization and through multiclassing, so let's talk about those next. For items for this character, Monk has slightly heavier item requirements than most other characters, but the good news is that the items that they want, mostly no other characters are going to want, so you can gain quite a lot of edge for your party by using the best-in-slot Monk items, which are not going to be best-in-slot for other classes. Some important items to consider include a very good set of clothing, or a robe, any non-armor, set of chest armor. The best, especially in the early game, is the Graceful Cloth, which increases your dexterity, which also therefore increases your armor class and your initiative, which is extremely important. And then in the late game, you're going to want the Vest of Soul Rejuvenation because we'll have Alert, so we'll be winning initiative anyways, and the Vest of Soul Rejuvenation gives us higher armor class and the ability to attack as a reaction. You also are going to want a good pair of gauntlets. In the early game, the Bracers of Defense will allow your armor class to be competitive with other characters, but mostly what we're looking for here is increases to our damage. Things like the Flawed Helldusk Gloves that allow your unarmed attacks to do additional damage can be incredibly powerful, or if you are happy to use stat items, the Gloves of Dexterity are the best for this character, because you can then drop your dexterity down to 8, put all those extra points into wisdom, and equip the gloves for 18 dexterity. This gives us +9 to initiative, so we're almost always going to win initiative, and combined with 16 wisdom will give us a base AC of 19, once I don't have the Cloak of Protection on, which is not amazing, but at least is respectable. Items that increase our armor class and saving throws, like the Cloak of Protection, are pretty good for this character, and items that increase our damage per attack are incredibly important. Items like the Flawed Helldusk Gloves are good for that. Items like the Callous Glow Ring, which does an extra 2 damage on every attack that you do against enemies that are in light. You can easily make this happen by casting light on your monk, so every enemy is lit. And this 2 damage is actually radiant damage, even though it's not listed what kind of damage it is in the tooltip. So between that and the radiant damage from your passive, because Manifestation of Soul lets you do radiant damage, you could actually use the Luminous Gloves to inflict a lot of Radiating Orb effects. Radiating Orb is incredibly powerful and will shut down bosses, but monks are already really good at that, so it's not a sort of primary strategy for monks, but it's one that they have really easy and powerful access to, and it's an incredibly strong strategy, so it's definitely one to keep in mind, especially for harder boss fights. For your boots, you're going to want the Boots of Uninhibited Kushigo, which just adds your Wisdom modifier to your unarmed attacks. Again, this is especially good if you're using the Gloves of Dexterity or Elixirs and have higher Wisdom than is listed here, but even 1 extra damage per attack when you're doing tons of additional attacks is very strong, and in the later game you will be able to respec some of your Dexterity into Wisdom to empower this and empower the boots and your passive as much as possible. Because you'll either be able to replace these stat points with elixirs or the gloves, or just sacrifice some dexterity because we have alert and other sources of bonus initiative, so we don't need dexterity as badly and we want wisdom more. Of course, the elixirs themselves are very, very powerful if you're going that route, and even if you aren't, the elixir of Cloud Giant Strength can massively boost your power level for a specific encounter or a specific adventuring day. Remember, you get double value out of increases to your strength compared to every other character who gets +1 to hit and damage, but you get +2 to hit and damage. So every point of strength for you is twice as good as it is for every other character. Finally, something important to know is that you can benefit from the passives of bows, even when attacking with your unarmed attacks. So you can equip something like the Bow of Awareness, which is available very early in the game and gives you +1 to your initiative. This can help patch your early game weakness in terms of initiative. Make sure you go before the enemies and kill them before they act. And later on can use the Deadshot if you don't have a party member that's using it to increase your chance of critically hitting. The improved critical passive here will work just fine on your unarmed attacks, and so you're going to crit twice as often. When you're making a ton of attacks and they all do a lot of additional damage dice, that can be a very powerful addition to your character. So to sum up, you are looking for things that do additional damage, things like the Helldust Gloves and the Callous Glow Ring, things that increase your initiative or defenses, and the specific best in slot items like Vest of Soul Rejuvenation and Boots of Uninhibited Kushigo, which nobody else wants but monks can use incredibly effectively. In the early game, you may also occasionally want to wear medium armor rather than be unarmored. You can sometimes increase your defenses for fights where you need more defenses, so do keep that in mind as an option if you're playing a character that has access to medium or light armor. Alright, that's it for items. Let's talk about the multiclassing build for monks and power this character up even further. Monks have one multiclass option that stands head and shoulders above all of the others. There are lots of viable multiclass builds you can make with monk, but if you're planning to multiclass a monk build, you have to have a very, very good reason not to multiclass with rogue. Rogue will power up monk by giving you even more mobility and increasing the amount of damage that you do per turn by approximately 50% by just giving you an extra flurry of blows every single turn of combat. And that obviously makes your character even more powerful when it comes to just dealing tremendous amounts of damage. So I'm just going to quickly show you the standard monk rogue build so that you know how to power up your character to the maximum possible extent. We're going to make all of the same decisions that we made up to level 6. So you can just follow this guide exactly up until level 6. Take Way of the Open Hand at level 3. Monk level 4, we're still taking Tavern Brawler. And still putting that extra point into Strength or Constitution if we're using Strength Elixirs. Monk level 5 is unchanged. And Monk level 6 is unchanged because we still want access to this super powerful Manifestation feature and the Wholeness of Body feature. However, at Monk level 6, we're going to deviate and we're going to take a Rogue level because we want to reach the very powerful Rogue options as quickly as we can. Rogue level 1 does very little for us, although it does give you some additional skills. This version of the character can be your lock-picking character, because you can get Sleight of Hand expertise and just be very good at Sleight of Hand. Rogue level 2 gives you Cunning Action for Hide and Dash and Disengage, so now you can do these things without spending key points, makes your character more efficient, and makes up for the key points that you don't get because we're taking Rogue levels instead of Monk levels. But the real key here is to hit Rogue level 3, where we get access to Thief Rogue, which gives us an additional bonus action. An extra bonus action is an extra flurry of blows every turn. So now our normal turns are 6 attacks per round, and when we have Wholeness of Body active, we get 8 attacks per round, and that's before any haste or bloodlust actions available from our allies. Many of these attacks can be knockdowns or pushbacks or stuns, so we have incredible amounts of damage and incredible amounts of sustainability because we get to replace the actions that cost key points on Monk with the Rogue's version of those actions that don't. So this version of the character is wildly more powerful and is just one of the best possible characters in Baldur's Gate 3. I rated it 3rd on my top 11 builds tier list out of all possible builds, the Open Hand Monk Rogue build, so that gives you some idea of how powerful this build is overall. To finish off this character, you have a choice to either go to Monk level 9 in order to get the Resonating Strikes AoE damage, or to Rogue level 4 and Monk level 8 in order to get a third feat. If you are building this character without using strength elixirs, you're going to want to take the 8-4 split to make sure you can still get 20 strength and alert. And if you are building this character with elixirs, you're probably better off going the 3-9 split in order to get access to Resonating Strikes, because you already have 20 strength and Tavern Brawler and alert, thanks to the elixirs giving you all of those stats for free. Some other additional options for Monk multiclassing include Fighter for Action Surge. 2 levels of Fighter can get you Action Surge, and you can even build an armored weapon-using Monk alongside a Fighter. A single Monk level can be applied to Paladin to give them dexterity-based attacks, which could be pretty useful. But mostly, if you're multiclassing, and Barbarian can give you Rage to make yourself significantly harder to kill with Barbarian Rage, and also to activate Karlach's Soul Coin mechanic if you're doing a Karlach multiclass for Monk and Barbarian. But mostly if you're multiclassing Monk, it's Runk. It's Runk because it is Rogue Monk. Mostly if you're multiclassing Monk, then you are going to be doing a 9-3 or 8-4 split between Monk and Rogue, with very few exceptions. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the Monk, one of the most broken characters in all of Baldur's Gate 3. And of course, if you have, feel free to leave a comment and hit like on the video. Doing that helps me out a ton with the algorithm, so I do appreciate you taking the time to do so. And of course, if you've enjoyed this video, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 guides and other strategy game content. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.